The NES is famous for having a variety of quality and less than stellar third-party published and developed games in its vast library. One of the more obscure companies that released a scant few titles for the system was Asmik, with a grand total of a whopping 3! Conquest of the Crystal Palace, Top Players Tennis, and WURM Journey to the Center of the Earth. While none of these share a genre, they have a unifying trait in common, evident on each game's title screen. A pink dinosaur-looking creature named Boomer, the Asmik mascot. Not surprisingly, like many other video game companies with mascots, Boomer had a starring role in his own Game Boy game, Boomer's Adventure in Asmik World. Quite an original title, huh?
I never knew about Boomer back in the day because I never played any of the Asmik titles as a child. One day, when searching for Game Boy games online, after having familiarized myself with the NES catalog, I landed upon this game and I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was a pretty bold move. Mascot-based titles are usually home to the big boys, your Marios, your Sonics, and to a lesser known extent, your Alex Kidds, to name but a few. I was definitely curious about this game after having seen Boomer in my expanding adulthood experience with the NES, but what were the chances that the average child in the early 90s would be drawn in by this mouthless, googly-eyed reptile? We all know the answer to that, seeing that Asmik, though it is still in business, is not a household name like Sega or Nintendo. Most mascot-driven titles are of a platforming adventure nature. Does Boomer's Adventure in Asmik World stick with the tried-and-true formula of its predecessors? Not even close.
Boomer's Adventure in Asmik World, the title that would have established Asmik's own cash cow property, is a puzzle maze game, a complete 180 from the mascot mainstays of the portable systems and consoles of the era. The closest thing I can compare it to is the Adventures of Lolo series, Kickle Cubicle, and if you look at it a certain way, Pac-Man. One thing lacking from Boomer that is present in the other titles is a fun factor. Sure, you'll inevitably hit a roadblock that will drive you bonkers trying to figure out a solution to get to the next section, but this frustration is offset by well-developed gameplay, catchy music, and likable characters. Boomer may be cute, but cuddly factor does not alone make a game. Though there is no indication of it during the course of gameplay, there actually is a story, as evidenced from the excellent high-quality scans of the back of the box and manual in Nintendo Age's database. The synopsis, which reminds me of the ads for the original Kirby games.
Who's Kirby? Behind the flabby facade, a physical powerhouse.
Describe Boomer as cute and pink on the outside, but all fight on the inside, and as the last warrior left in Asmik World, which is held in terror by the evil Lord Zuzun. All I know is that you traverse many mazes with the goal of finding the key to open the locked door to progress to another maze where you do the same thing. In the course of carrying out his quest, Boomer is besieged by a number of creatures who will insta-kill him by running into him. Boomer does not have a traditional attack to counter these threats. Instead, by holding the A button, Boomer can dig a hole which will trap the enemies and destroy them by holding A again, which covers over the hole. These traps can be placed all across the levels and will remain there until either an enemy falls into it or Boomer removes the hole. Be careful, as Boomer can get stuck in one of his own traps, leaving him defenseless against the swarming enemies all around him. The key that is the ticket out of these mazes is held by one of these creatures, and successfully performing the trap will reward Boomer with the desired item. There are a number of items that Boomer can obtain that will help him locate the position of the key, such as compasses and radar detectors, but they really don't seem to make much of a difference, and it seems more random chance than anything when the key will show up. More times than I can count, the timer would run out, killing Boomer with no sighting of the key to be found. Stage 1 is the biggest joke of a level, if you can call it that, I've ever seen. Look at this. You just walk straight to the goal, obtaining the key in the process. There are no enemies to get in Boomer's way, or any other hardships for that matter. Elmo's number journey looks like Silver Surfer in comparison to this. The manual states that there are 8 worlds with 8 stages each, signifying the quest to reach the top of Zuzune's tower and the final battle, making 64 levels total. That seems like quite a Herculean feat to accomplish, and I didn't even come close to the goal, not even clearing World 1. Even if I could get far enough to meet Zuzune on the battlefield, I don't think I'd want to, due to one factor alone: the music. Sure, it seems all cheery and fun at first, perhaps even fitting the tough yet cute nature of our protagonist, and sure it might seem catchy and enjoyable upon the initial listen, but as far as I played through, minus the little ditty that transitions between each stage, it is the only song played throughout World 1, and potentially longer. Even with the soundtrack muted, Boomer's adventure in Asmik World would become very tedious quickly. All you do is wait what seems like eons for the key to appear, mindlessly running around digging holes or picking up the occasional boomerang or bone power-up, counting down the time limit. Combining this with the mind-numbing, bubbly, repeating soundtrack is probably close to what a bad trip must be like. I've attempted to play this a number of times, the longest session being when I captured the footage for this review, but I couldn't last even a full hour before I had to shut it off.
While I wasn't expecting to find a lost gem, I had moderate hopes and expectations for Boomer's adventure in Asmik World. I was drawn in by the character's appearances in front of those select NES titles. When I found out about his solo Game Boy debut, I had to learn more about it and Boomer himself. The character's cute and the story's relatively solid, but the finished execution of the premise deflated the minimal expectations that I hoped the title would live up to. Don't get me wrong, the game isn't horrible, and I like the concept of the levels of the game being the stories of the tower, but I think the character would have been better suited with a more traditional side-scrolling platformer like its forebears, akin to Spot the Cool Adventure, also for Game Boy. Boomer's adventure in Asmik World is at most a mild curiosity, a story of a potential mascot that just couldn't compete with the Italian plumber and hedgehog, who still remain household names over 20 years after their initial appearances. Props to Asmik for creating an original property and diverting from a tried and true formula, but in the end, Boomer and this title were destined to be no more than a footnote in gaming history among the bargain bin titles that didn't sell. If you want to play a game related to Boomer, I would suggest WURM, one of the Asmik NES titles, which has a variety of play options, a decent soundtrack, and a wacky story. As far as something in the puzzle style of Boomer, any of the games mentioned earlier, or even something like Bubble Bobble or Trog for the NES, would be a much more suitable and enjoyable experience. This concludes the story of Boomer, the mascot who never was.